Good morning, everybody, and welcome. It's time to call to order the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal informal session for July 8th, 2021. And at this time, we will have our flag salute. And Commissioner Burschauer, would you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And do we have anything to add to our joint calendar schedules? Commissioners? Nothing?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair.
We'll move on to item D, public comment. We've received, Commissioner Burschauer.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. I was going to mention that I am joining Superintendent Vickery and Abishaw next Wednesday at 1:30 in Salem to tour their CTEC West or CTEC facility there, because that's kind of the model for what Sheridan is trying to do. So if either of you would like to attend with me, I'm sure that would be fine. I don't think there's a cap on who can go through. So that's July 14th, Wednesday at 1:30.
And thank you, Commissioner. I was able to tour it at some point here in the past, but so I will pass on it, but thank you for the invitation.
Could you note that, Carrie, in our joint schedule, just in case another commissioner can make it? Thank you for that, Commissioner. We'll move on to public comment, and Carolina has been very gracious in getting those to us even up to this morning. So thank you. And thank you everybody who took the time to weigh in on issues on our agenda. Item E is our work session, and this is a time reserved for topics of discussion. We were talking last week about the vaccine adverse event reporting system, and I had asked and had some discussions with our Health and Human Services Director, Lindsay Manfred, about adding more data to our website so we could I feel it would be important to add information so folks can really get a balanced view of the risk benefit of the vaccines. And so we've had ongoing conversations, and I've asked Dr. Manfred to pretty much give us a little bit more information on the website, but I understand, Lindsay, that you've been reluctant to do that because concerns about misinformation. So maybe we could just start from where we left off last time.
Certainly. So I am absolutely in favor of ensuring that folks have access to information, whether it's verbally or through our website, or when they're getting a vaccine, around the risks and the benefits of the vaccine. And I think that's why we've really worked hard to make sure things like the EUAs and things are very prominent on our website, and certainly folks are getting those when they receive the vaccine. I think my concern really related to the VAERS information is not that the VAERS information isn't important. It's a really important and critical surveillance tool that's used by public health officials, that this is CDC, to track and look at any trends that might be concerning or alarming. And those are the things that we've seen where we've had some new information come in, whether it be related to the myocarditis or whether it be related to the blood clots associated with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And again, those things are incredibly rare. When you look at the number of individuals who have had those vaccines, but what that surveillance tool has allowed us to do is understand that and extract that information. I think when you're just using that VAERS information in terms of just what is input into it and making assumptions that those are risks based on that information, I think that's where I get concerned, because that's not the way the tool was intended to use, and that's not the way the tool it's just that's not correct information if it's extracted in that way and used for that purpose. The tool itself has a very discrete purpose, and that is for that robust surveillance that is critical when we're talking about any vaccine, including COVID-19 vaccine. I think I certainly don't want to step in the way of people accessing that information. And so I've been very, I would be happy to make sure that that information is readily available to people through the link so that they can access it themselves. We've discussed, making sure that people know how to use that, so we can even put the steps of how people would access that information, being clear, what this information means and what it doesn't mean. And for me, the most critical piece is that people have access to the information of how to input something into VAERS if they feel like they may have experienced a side effect. And so that's a piece that's really important to me. We want to make sure anyone can access that piece to input any piece of information that they feel they would like to, based on what they might be experiencing after a vaccine.
We had a conversation yesterday, and I said, well, what would be a compromise here where you and I can come to some agreement where I understand your concerns and you understand my interest in getting more information to the public. And I had suggested that what if we just showed people the step-by-step how to do it. Of course, I would like the data extraction. That would be on my wish list, is to not only but to do a weekly summary of the actual, the specific categories, the subcategories in the data, to put that up there. Understanding there's a reluctance to do that, the recommendation would be to put the screenshots of how to do this, because it's not an easy click on it and you'll see all of the adverse events that have been reported and vetted, those types of things. But to put the step-by-step screenshots so that people can walk through the process and actually arrive at the data themselves. It's not super user-friendly, but it's better than just giving them a link. So commissioners, I just wanted to get your input on that as a compromise, as a way to move forward, because we're just going to continue to have this discussion week after week. Commissioner Kula?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director Manfred. I think that providing the VAERS, the link for reporting, for submitting reports, and then having some of the screenshots that I believe Commissioner Sterrett sent to Ken to send to us are appropriate for allowing people, giving people the tools, right, to report the data that's report an incident, but also to be able to inform themselves. I think is a suitable compromise. I don't. Some of them seem to go further than they really needed to. I think once you get to the click on incidents that you'd like to see, that's probably the step that we can stop at.
Well, I always think more information is better, and people can go as far as they want to go. It's kind of like surfing the web. You could spend hours just going from link to link to link. But if they get on VAERS and they really start digging into the info, it might be something that they would be interested in doing. Commissioner Burschauer.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was trying to find my button here. So I'm looking at the information that was sent to us yesterday. I do agree that it's worth putting down some instructions on how to navigate VAERS, because I think that, if people are going to our website and they're concerned with maybe some reactions that they're having, it's worthwhile to help them walk through that process, because I think that data is very important. The parts that I look for, I think these are updated weekly, are kind of these, larger summaries of what each vaccine has been reporting, the spontaneous miscarriages, the, people who have been hospitalized, the kind of weekly summary and totals. Those are sort of most relevant for me. And I do think it is worth posting that and updating it on a weekly basis. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if that's weekly, but I believe it is. Again, I go back to what I said last week, which is information is power, and the more information that we can give, I think is better. We had the FDA come out and recommend that these warnings be placed on these vaccines, and I believe they also recommended that men under the age of 30 use significant caution when they're getting these vaccines. So my feeling is that this vaccine, or these vaccines related to COVID, seem to be very different from ones that I've had in my past, and in my childhood. It's almost like it's a process we're going through with these companies who are releasing these vaccines. It's a different process than maybe vaccines that have been tested over years and years and years. So I do feel that we should err on the side of great caution and just giving people as much information as they can possibly get.
Commissioner Kula.
Pardon me, Chair, maybe we could go to Director Manfred. I just wanted to note that I think that providing those, there are a couple of problems as I see it with providing those weekly summaries. One is that somebody's going to need to do it within our staff. But the second thing is that I really want to make sure that people understand that this is not causation and that VAERS is self-reported and doctor-reported. And it's not saying this is directly related to the vaccine, but perhaps that's what Director Manfred is going to say.
Right.
So I think we have a good compromise with what you've proposed, Chair.
Okay, Dr. Manfred, as far as a response to Commissioner Berschauer's suggestion.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, Commissioner Kula stated it, but I think in addition to what he shared around ensuring that we understand that these are not causation, I think to look at VAERS data and to use VAERS data, you need to be comparing it to what you would see in a non-COVID vaccine state. And so, I've heard spontaneous abortions or miscarriages come up a number of times in these meetings, and there has been research that looks at the VAERS data compared to what we typically see, and they're not seeing an increase, right? So by sharing that information, it is incorrect to say that we are seeing an increase in spontaneous abortions related to COVID vaccine, because we've had research that none of that came out in the clinical trials. And when you are looking at it and comparing it to what we typically see, then there's not a difference. And so those are the important pieces that have to get incorporated in when you're trying to interpret what VAERS data means and what it doesn't mean. And I think, another example is, it shows somewhere around 2,000 heart attacks in the VAERS data. Well, we have 2,000 heart attacks in the US every single day. And of course, some of those individuals are going to have received the vaccine. And so without doing that deeper analysis, you can't draw any conclusions from the vaccine. And by putting that data in that way on our website, it really indicates that public health believes that these things are being attributed to the vaccine. And that's just not the case. And so, again, I think if we can come to that compromise of ensuring that people know how to access this, giving them the tools so that they have some guidelines or some instructions, I should say, on how to do that so they can go in and find that information, I am comfortable with that. And I also just want to make sure that I think I've said this before, but every single person who comes in and gets a vaccine, whether it's from us or anyone else in our community, they receive information from the Be Safe program that strongly encourages them to put any sort of side effects, whether it's a sore arm or something that certainly is more rare, but a possibility. We want everything in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that spontaneous abortions, because in the initial clinical trials, pregnant women were not part of those. We are actually in clinical trials, but the initial clinical trials, and also the Pfizer research shows that there is a concentration in the ovary. So we are seeing some concerns there. And as far as the heart attacks, we've got heart attacks, yeah, but we typically don't see them in young men within right after the second shot. That seems to be a correlation, at least to some degree. So while I understand your concerns about putting that out there and saying this is the reason for these particular things, it's sort of like when you're buying something online, you want to see what the reviews are. If we can do that for sheets and towels, I think we can look at sort of the reviews, if you will, about something as significant as a medical procedure. So I still feel that it's important for us to put that information out there. And while I appreciate the compromise we talked about showing people how to get to it, I don't think that it's untoward to ask that we have a summary. I have offered to send that summary on a weekly basis if there's no staff time, and then have you check my work or have you check the work on the steps of how we get there. but I'm wondering what the next step is. I know Christian and I have had a conversation about what do we do about how we discuss, what is the role of the local public health authority? What is the role of the commissioners? And certainly understanding and respecting the parameters of everybody's jurisdiction here. I wanted to see if Christian could weigh in on just the basics about what we would be considering and how. Commissioner Kula, Commissioner, I'd like to have Christian weigh in on this if you don't mind. Thank you. So Christian, I had asked you a little bit about what the considerations would be in saying, hey, we really want to put this out there. We understand public health might have some disagreement on this, but where do we land on an impasse, let's say?
Yeah, generally, and we've talked about this in other contexts before, the board sets the policy. Before the board made a decision around that, we want to make sure that the policy was not something that was illegal. We'd want to make sure that it was in compliance with the law and that it wouldn't hopefully put us out of compliance with any contractual obligations or expose the county to any additional risk or liability. From what you've been discussing, I don't believe that there is that risk here, given what I understand about the kind of information that you'd like to see on the website. But if Dr. Manfred or others have concerns about whether or not that creates some risk, I think that would probably be a worthwhile discussion to have. But beyond that, it would be up to the board to make the policy decision.
Just because if we're going to put the links to how to get to those, it's almost, we're putting the same data in a way, we're just not making it as user friendly. So Commissioner Kula?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to address that because that was what I was going to address. So you probably know this, but I have a master's in ecology, right? And a lot of that is statistics. And it's basically statistics outside. One thing I've always found to be helpful is that when presented with a data set that I might not understand, I always find it helpful to actually do the steps to produce that data set. So in coming to this case, the reason why I would ask that we stay with the proposed compromise, which you proposed, Chair, and that we provided when Director Manfred was approving of, is that the table on its own, at least that you presented to me, I felt like was very out of context. It was alarming to me. It was concerning to me. And then I had to look at it multiple times and compare it to VAERS and how it was being exported in order to really understand what this data was that was being presented. So I had to make my own conclusions after diving deep into it. What I would encourage with that experience, with that very specific experience, you probably totally understand what's being presented. But for me, what I had to do was actually go in and do the steps in order to see what was being presented, what the pluses and the minuses were, what the previous week meant, was it across the whole country. So what I would appreciate, I would request, in order to be very clear and transparent, because if we're trying to inform the public, we should actually inform the public, not misguide them or misdirect them or mislead them, is to provide the steps to produce reports on the website, but nothing more. That's my request. And just from my personal experience, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Commissioner Kula. Commissioner Berschauer?
Thank you, Chair. Again, I just go back to, we can tell people how to report, self-report, which I think is very important, using the VAERS system. But I also think that people are looking for information. And if it's not presented in a way that they can actually understand, if they have to walk through all those steps and that we don't just provide sort of a weekly update as to here's what the information is saying. And these aren't just, you know, random people who are doing this. These are MDs across the country who are reporting this information. You know, I just don't think it's going to be readily used. You know, what's the point, right? I do look at those weekly summaries. Sometimes the numbers go up, sometimes the numbers go down based on the verification process, but I find the information helpful. And I will say, just in general, why are we doing this? We're doing this not because, you know, of our own, maybe our own personal philosophy. Some of us seem to have had the vaccine, some did not. I'm concerned about this because I'm hearing from people, our constituents, that they are concerned, they have concerns, and they want to know the information.
Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. I just, if we're talking about why we're doing this or what the point of it is, my understanding was that it was to provide information to people that's accurate and credible. Is that like to have full information? And if that's the case, then the weekly summary table, as presented by Chair Stara in the email, does not do that. It's misleading. As a consumer of information, it's misleading to me. And I found myself drawing conclusions that were not supported by the data with the background information and labels associated with them. So if we're going to say that we want people to be fully informed, I don't think that the weekly summaries on their own does that.
Thank you. Dr. Manfred.
I know the mute button. Yeah, I mean, I stand by my earlier statements, and I agree with Commissioner Kula here. I think that the information as it's been presented is not informative. It does not provide people with that risk-benefit analysis and information that I think is important for people to have before they make a decision. And I think, you know, when we're looking at any of those things that are reported into VAERS, you have to have that comparison. You have to have that further analysis to make sense of it.
Thank you, Dr. Manfred. A couple of things. So I'm wondering if there is yet a plan C. So we had an initial compromise, and now Commissioner Bershauer is asking for specific information. What if there was a weekly data summary that was something that everyone could be comfortable with in terms of a snapshot? Perhaps extrapolating that data, you have to really dig, and the information is there. But again, it's one of those things you have to really get in there and play with. But if there was a data summary that we could share with people that would be acceptable, Dr. Manfred, in terms of getting information out there, that perhaps there was a little more confidence in those data summaries, even if they were at a higher level of a data summary that didn't have such specific breakdowns. Is there something, because we're going with CDC data and a CDC website and a tool, what would be your level of comfort to share that information? Ken.
I just wanted to quickly, because I know there's been the discussion if, you know, about the VAERS data, because I think it's one, you know, and I'm just and if I'm mishearing or, you know, misunderstanding, my apologies. But I think the one thing I'd like to just quickly clarify, because we talked about access for reporting into VAERS, but I also think it's important to also clarify that as part of that access and some of the discussions, it's not just giving instructions for reporting to VAERS, but it's also how to access the data that has been reported to VAERS. So that portion, I believe, was part of the original discussions and some of the compromises, providing that access to VAERS with some instructions on how to access not only reporting, but then also how to get to data related to those vaccines. The second part that I think it's, you know, a question that I have and warrants some discussion, because I know we're now talking about a summary of the data that is provided in VAERS. You know, I've gone to CDC website, I've at FDA, I've gone to VAERS. you know, the summary data that we're seeing is not necessarily something that's being put together that I'm aware of or being released by CDC, unless I'm mistaken. So then the question would be if there's kind of this expectation or want to provide data summaries, then it would be identifying, you know, I don't know how typical it would be for, you know, the staffing and resources in order to pull that data to prepare some kind of a summary report and what that might look like on this VAERS data, I think is an outstanding question, and that I think Lindsay, Director Manfred may want to share some more about on what that might look like, or possible other examples that we may be doing something of a similar fashion. So I know we're having a lot of discussions around the summary, and I think, you know, I'm not sure, you know, where the summaries and the information that was shared, who prepared those summaries, you know, and so there's some questions about, you know, the mechanics around that and the operational considerations.
Dr. Manfred, do we have we've got an epidemiologist, we've got the ability to, I know we had contracted at one point with Benton County, and now that contract is over from what I understand, but we do have access to, anyway, I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, so certainly. We do have an epidemiologist on staff who is phenomenal and great with data analytics. I worry that what you're asking for is far greater than one person could do. So, you know, if we think about the CDC and this surveillance system, there are many people whose full-time jobs are to access and monitor and oversee this surveillance system. And then, because in order to provide a summary of things that are in VAERS that are, you know, clinical or statistical significance, that means that we're going in and looking at each one of those categories and understanding how that looks for, you know, what we would expect to see. So, you know, unfortunately in the US, we expect to see this number of heart attacks, this number of, you know, fill in the blank. And so doing that analysis would require going in and looking at each of those, understanding what we would typically have to see, breaking down those typically what we would see by age categories and different things. And so I think that level of analysis is pretty incredible and in depth to be able to provide that. And that is why we rely on the CDC to be able to do that for us.
So is there, I've got to believe that someone is doing this data analysis, that we are not the only ones looking at VAERS data, that there are certainly the FDA is looking, and CDC and the World Health Organization and OHA. And so this data is, and extrapolating this data is certainly not something that is so wildly out of the realm of us sharing. I'm having a hard time believing that with all the, we have an epidemiologist and we've got access to a variety of just about any kind of data you want to get your hands on, that we couldn't put together a summary that gives people a snapshot of something that gives them a bit more information. Commissioner Berschauer, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. To kind of address Ken's point, I was looking at the email that was sent to us. It does seem like there is, you know, more of an official chart that was a screenshot from VAERS. And then there's a bunch of information below that shows, you know, in more in-depth detail and summary of reported events, but it doesn't seem to be official, maybe. So from my view, and keep in mind, there is no other database of information that we can pull from. VAERS is it, as far as I know. So that's why we're talking about it. But it doesn't seem like it would be all that difficult to pull down this chart that at least lists the kind of the top concerns, I would say: death, life-threatening, permanent disability, all that stuff. I don't know if a similar chart exists that would show the spontaneous miscarriages, all that other kind of stuff. If it does, it doesn't seem like it would be that difficult to pull it up and provide weekly updates. You know, and Commissioner Sterrett has offered to do that work and have it be checked. So, you know, kind of to get to Ken's point, I agree. I think that we can't just be throwing up summaries that don't necessarily look like they came from the CDC or the VAERS system. But if there's a way to come up with those summaries and provide some screenshots or updates weekly, then I would be in favor of that. And if you note, underneath these charts, there is a disclaimer that says submitting, you know, reports to VAERS does not mean that healthcare personnel or the vaccine caused or contributed to the adverse event. So it seems to me like they're doing a good job of saying, look, these are self-reporting adverse events. If we want to provide our own summary of how we sort of view VAERS, I would be fine with that too. But I do think the information is relevant to the folks that we serve.
Commissioner Kula. Thank you, Commissioner.
It turns out I can read lips, so thank you, Chair. Commissioner Bershauer, I still think that it's a benefit to community members to do this on their own in order to really get at the information that they're most interested in or most concerned about. And I think if we're going to be providing screenshots of tables that they can go to on their own to generate them, and it's in the interest of informing people, we should probably do the same thing for morbidity and mortality related to coronavirus itself. If we're going to get into informing people about costs and benefit analysis and providing that information to them. But I'm not suggesting we should do that. What I am suggesting is that we should go with I think that on Chair Sterrett's series of screenshots, the last one is then click to send or whatever. I think that's the most appropriate thing for taking people and showing them how to do something and then allowing them to do the work themselves. And again, at the bottom, there are disclaimers, so they're going to see those. But we do not need to be in the business of providing that information outside of a greater context, is my view. Unless we're wanting to do the next step of providing that morbidity and mortality information as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think that's easily enough accomplished. That data set is also very easily accomplished. The other thing I was thinking is, you know, we work so hard when we're putting out our business grants to make the grant application easy for people so that they can access a grant. And here we are with something which is as basic is our health, and we don't want to make it that easy for them. We want them to do the work. Whereas before, when we offer them grants for their businesses, we're like, we have to make this grant, we have to lower the barriers, and we have to make this grant application really, really simple so that anybody can do it, and there won't be a barrier to doing it. Yet when it comes to accessing health information, we want to tell people to do their own work. But I do think that there again is that third part here, which would be a compromise where if you basically look at some basic data sets and offer those on a weekly basis, people can see trends, and trends are sometimes, or trends can be very informative. If we are going to be giving information out and we are looked at as the local public health authority and we want that confidence, then I think we need to do a more balanced job of adding more information other than the OHA. OHA basically, what they say is what we do, that we basically, because we get money from them, we have to only use their narrative. And I would disagree and think that there are elements to what we can do which would be different from a one-size-fits-all OHA. I'm only suggesting CDC, World Health Organization, FDA, that the data available there is prominent on our website. So is there Dr. Manfred, is there something that you see coming out of this discussion which would be a compromise between what Commissioner Bershauer suggested, what I've suggested, and what Commissioner Kula's concerns are, and also taking into effect what our county council has suggested, making sure that we're not further dealing with concerns with contractual violations with OHA. I don't see that any of this data is, because it's, you know, CDC and they're always pointing to CDC. So anyhow, is there something that you see here that might be a different compromise?
So one suggestion I could offer is, if it doesn't feel like the risk information conveyed in the EUA is apparent enough, and I've got it pulled up, right? And it goes through and it lists different things that you should make sure you notify your provider about. There are cautionary components that if you fit one of these bullet points, you know, you may want to ask more questions. You need to make sure they know that this is something that a condition you have, or those things. My suggestion would be, if we don't feel like that is apparent enough through the EUA, is to extract that information from the EUA and make it more apparent on our website. Again, we've got the EUAs linked to in that document, but we could take that information and make it more specific and put it on the website so that it's not in the PDF. I think that that could be a way to ensure people are seeing those areas of caution, or areas where there may need to be a deeper dive in understanding your own risk. So I think that could potentially be something that might help us bridge the gap here. And again, I'm fully supportive of making sure that people have the ability and the tools to be able to access this data, so that they are fully understanding what they're getting. Because again, even trends, well, yes, trends are really helpful, but we know that there are also illnesses, diseases, and things that are very seasonal. And so we could see a big trend up in something, but it doesn't mean that it's related to the vaccine. It means that that's what happens typically in, you know, X, Y, or Z month. Because that is something that we see with various diseases and illnesses and injuries, to be quite honest. So that would be another thing I would offer as a potential solution or compromise.
Oh, I appreciate that. And the EUA does list some specifics, but I'm also wondering, for instance, about the FDA warning on Moderna and Pfizer regarding myocarditis and things like that. And that wouldn't be one of those preconditions we would know about in the EUA, because until, you know, these are able-bodied young men who are experiencing this, is what we're seeing. So what would we do as far as adding the FDA warning or various updates that you've sent out advisories to our providers?
Sure. Certainly. Well, that information did get added to both the Pfizer and Moderna EUA, which is helpful. So it's in the linked EUA, but we could certainly pull that information out and try to make that more apparent on our website as well. I think that would be absolutely fine. We do still have information about myocarditis on the website, knowing that people might be interested in finding out more information. So we still have that alert out there, but we could pull some of that information from the EUA and just put it all on its own, so that people aren't having to link to the EUA. Instead, it's just there.
Thank you. Commissioner Burschauer, thoughts on how we proceed?
Chair, I would be fine with that compromise. It sounds like that's the way you're leaning to. I guess my overall concern is that, you know, now that we've reached, I think it's what, 62.5% vaccinated rate in our county, it feels like we're sort of reaching that saturation point with adults. And the concern all along was, are we pushing people to do this without the full picture of all of the information? And now the push seems to be, let's go after the children under 18. So I just feel like this is really, really important stuff that we're talking about. And I appreciate the open dialogue. You know, that is still a significant concern of mine, that we are now shifting to children, because children statistically have not contracted the virus in the same way. And there's also other reports coming out. Israel is doing much more robust data analytics than the US is, and they're finding that the report I read yesterday was that the Pfizer vaccine is only 64% effective in terms of breakthrough cases. So it's a shift from, the message is you get the vaccine and you don't get the COVID virus. Now it's shifting to, well, the vaccine can protect you from getting serious symptoms and illness from COVID, but you still might get COVID. So that's a significant push the other direction. And again, that information is been studied a little bit longer and in more depth than the US. So I can see this conversation shifting in the future as well. But I just, again, knowledge is power, information is power. And I think that we are doing our constituents a great service to put it all out there and say, here it is, you know, you make up your own mind. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kula.
Well, speaking of recent science, Science Magazine published this last week an amazing research showing that neutralizing antibodies and T cells are 1,000-fold more available and active in folks who've had the virus and have had received one of the Pfizer or Moderna. So a powerful, I think they call it a hybrid approach to immunity. So we're also, the research and the information is changing all the time, including this new one, which is a very different message. Researchers found that two courses of the Pfizer and Moderna in this particular setting that they watched was not as effective or was not any more effective than having one dose. So again, a really fascinating thing where we're learning that people who've had it benefit from getting the vaccine. I would support this particular compromise that Director Manfred has proposed.
Thank you. So could we outline this a little more specifically, Dr. Manfred, so that we're looking at putting the screenshots so that people can access the data, and also prominently placing the FDA warning and the, because this is almost a preemptive, you know, you're not saying, do you have this? You're saying you might want to think about this being a risk factor for males under 30. So prominently placing the FDA warning of those two vaccines, and then any updates that come like that. So in other words, let's say we get another FDA black box warning or another advisory like that would be prominently placed on the website. So we can say we're current and we're keeping track and it's balanced. Does that seem like a reasonable compromise? Is that something everybody can live with? Commissioner Berschauer, anything else you'd want to add to that?
No, Chair, I think that's a reasonable compromise. Thank you.
Okay, well, I appreciate the discussion. And again, Dr. Manfred, I have appreciated your being very gracious throughout these processes with sometimes contentious conversations. So we really don't need any particular board action other than just consensus and appreciation for your work and the team that you have and the work that you have before you. So thank you. Appreciate that. And don't go anywhere. I mean, you can just maybe go do something else while we're going to come back to you. So maybe you can get your emails done and we'll just call you when we're ready for the equity plan.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Ken.
Yeah, and I think it's important because I was going to bring it up a little bit later, but Director Manfred, I think we're going to need her because we missed an agenda item that should have been added under old business, which is revisiting the restaurant licensing fees. And so that I was going to ask at that point to have that added, have the agenda amended and have that item put back under old business. And so we'll need Director Manfred to also provide some information and some input on that.
Do we want to, okay, so we don't, don't go too far, but you don't have to sit there and look at us and watch us unless you really want to.
Stick around. Thanks.
Who would want to do that? Thank you very much. All right, we'll try to get to it quickly. Thank you. So we'll move on to department updates, and we have none. And we'll move on to the consent agenda. Motion to approve. Oh, there's Ken.
Just a reminder that per the LCRB meeting this morning, that Christian had asked that item number 8 that's on the consent agenda be subject to final approval, review and approval of County Counsel's office.
Okay, thank you. So motion to approve with that addition to item number 8.
Chair, I move that we approve the consent agenda with the addition to number 8, that it be subject to approval of County Council.
Thank you. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. On to, where are we? On to committees. And that's the approval of reappointing the following members to the Local Public Safety Coordinating Council, or LPSC, each to 3-year terms to expire July.
I'm sorry, Chair, but that's actually part of the consent agenda.
Is that part? Okay, I was
Yes.
kind of trying to figure that out on the fly. So thanks
On
for.
page 3 is the start of agenda item H, which is old business. That should be the next item.
Okay, so where are we going to add the restaurant licensing fees? Do you want to make that item 3?
Yes, please.
Okay, so that'll be item H3. So we'll move to item H1, which is consideration of adoption of the written findings and conditions in the matter of upholding the planning director's approval of planning docket C 2320 RN-03-20, which is a conditional use request for the construction of a new public road in the exclusive farm use zone with a 50-foot right of way. The proposed road name is Northwest Janke Drive. Applicant Paul and Martha Janke. Trustees for Janke Trust, Charles and Scotty Dolans, and Cyclops Properties LLC. The appellant, Catherine Jernstadt, representing Friends of Yamhill County, tax lot 4501-01290 and 4501-1293. The location is 13799 Northwest Willis Road, McMinnville, and this has been continued from June 17th. And I believe there's Todd. Hi, Todd Sadlow. Thank you. Did you want to add anything to this, or do we just want to go ahead and adopt? But since you made the effort, we should really hear from you.
That's right. Madam Chair, Commissioners, the only change that was made to the board order and findings that you received last week is that the one change was made to the board order, and that was to reflect a unanimous vote. Thank you, Carolina, for catching that. Otherwise, the findings are the same draft that you got last week.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Todd Sadlow? All right, we don't have questions, so I will entertain a motion to approve item H1.
I move that we approve item H1. And thank you, Todd, and thank you, Carolina, for catching that.
Thank you, Carolina. Thank you very much, Todd. All right, motion to approve. Further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes and the findings are adopted. And thank you, Mr. Sadlow, and we wish you safe travels.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. All righty. We'll move on to item H2, which is consideration of the approval to submit the COVID-19 vaccine equity plan to the Oregon Health Authority. We continued this from July 1st, 2021, and I'm glad that Director Manfred didn't go too far. That was fast. I wasn't expecting that. Anyway, so we have we've had more discussion on this, and we do have an updated equity plan. Thank you for sharing that. And the discussions, I've had some discussions with Director Manfred and wanted to make sure that we were going to include more comments. And I believe there's a red line on the adding risk and benefit, including risks and benefits under item number 8. So Commissioners, you've had a chance to look at the revised document. Do we have any questions, concerns, comments, suggestions? Commissioner Kula.
Chair, I'm comfortable with this and ready to approve submitting it to OHA. I think it's an important document to have, and I look forward to more discussion though.
Thank you. Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. So I did have some questions from last time, and Director Manfred kind of exchanged emails. I think she's prepared to answer those today, but I'll just kind of review quickly. What did we spend the initial $300-some-thousand on, and is it fully spent? What kind of data or proof do we have that we are not reaching certain segments of our population with access to the vaccine? And then there's also that piece about, kind of targeting children, for lack of a better term, but, increasing access to schools and doing school-based vaccine clinics on children. That's a big part of it for me too. in terms of my concerns.
Thank you, Commissioner. Director Manfred.
Sure, happy to speak to those things. So largely what the dollars have been spent on thus far is the time and energy it took to write the plan, to review the plan, to work with our community partners, to get feedback on the plan. So that's really the bulk of what's happened so far. And no, the initial round of dollars has not been yet expended fully. We are, we're having conversations with some of our community-based organizations who have been very active in this work, who are needing additional funding to help support the work that they're doing in the community. And so I do anticipate having some interest in our community partners in utilizing and accessing some of these funds for their work moving forward. In terms of just the plan itself and the work and kind of, I guess, the term you used before, have we saturated the market, so to speak? And I would say, just to give you a little bit of kind of a snapshot of where we are, in Yamhill County, so not just the public health staff, but throughout the county, there were a little over 4,000 vaccines given in June. The week, like 2 weeks ago was the last time I looked at the just 1 week snapshot. It was actually the week that it was swelteringly hot. We did roughly 500 vaccines that week, and that included having to close down multiple clinics because of the heat and what I imagine is probably fewer people out and about, when it's 100 plus degrees outside. So I would say we're still seeing certainly uptake of vaccine. It's much smaller than February, March certainly, but we are still seeing that increase from week to week, and people coming into our clinic, people going to events and whatnot. So I think there is still the demand for the vaccine. It's just not quite as intense as it was early on. What we're hearing from people that we talk to, as well as what our community-based organizations and partners are telling us from their conversations with community members are not so much that they don't know where to necessarily go, although there may be still some of that. It's that there still are barriers that exist for individuals to enable them to access the vaccine. And a couple of those that have really stood out are childcare, when you have multiple children and don't necessarily want to take them all to a medical appointment, transportation, particularly when you have multiple people in your families and you need to all transport them together. That can be really challenging for folks. And then needing more evening and weekend hours. Now, we've really worked hard to try to increase access to evening and weekend hours, but it is still quite limited. And so, that tells me that we need to be thinking about how we might be able to increase that access, to problem solve around needs related to transportation. And my hope is that the funding streams can both help with the planning and figuring that out as a community of how we can do that, but also help support the resource that might be needed in order for us to do that, to have people available on more evenings and weekends and to support that type of thing.
I just have a quick follow-up, Chair, if I might.
Yes, Commissioner.
Do we know, thank you, do we know how much is left of kind of that initial funding? I mean, it seems like if the work that's been done so far is to create the plan or write the plan, it seems like there might be a significant amount of money left. Is that safe to say?
I don't have the answer to that. I know this morning they were doing some collection of data to be able to do the first report out on that, but I don't have an answer to what that is.
Thank you. Commissioner Kula.
Ken also unmuted himself, but I just wanted to note that as far as the second round of funding, that will come before us presumably as an approval. So we don't necessarily need to approve a second round of funding if we find that it isn't needed. But I do think that the vaccine equity plan is still important.
Can you say that again? I'm not sure I caught your drift on the second round.
Yes, so we don't need to approve it. Presumably the funding will come before us as a request for approval. So this isn't an automatic thing that we submit it and then we get it. Presumably, is that correct?
No.
Actually, under the grant agreement, the second round of funds is subject to the approval of and submittal of the equity plan. And then if the state approves, if OHA and the governor's office approves our submittal, then that would release the funds to the county. There wouldn't
Okay.
be, the grant agreement was already reviewed and was given approval. And so we received the first half of the funding, and like Director Manfred was sharing earlier, we're currently working on our first report right now. I've seen an early number. We haven't spent, I mean, we've received just over $322,000 on June 9th. And so we have not spent a substantial amount of that in the last 30 days or the last 30 plus days. So so we still have quite a bit of that funding left. And then the next piece would be is once this plan, you know, the second half of the funding of the total 600 plus $1,000. Sorry, I don't have numbers in front of me. Would be released upon the state approval of that plan. So there wouldn't be any further action required from the board.
Thank you, Ken. Commissioner Bershauer, did you have another question? Well, let me just jump in here real quick about the, well, go ahead. You look like you're ready.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I'm trying to gather my thoughts, so I might in a minute. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got $322,000 was the initial allocation, the initial grant, and then we've got another 320 something thousand coming. I'm looking at the total amount of a grant we approved for all of our public health work, communicable disease wise, which was 800 and something. Now I'm looking at this, which is $645,000 total to do basically, we use the term, you know, mop up when after a fire. I mean, that's a significant part of an after action event is now we've got this amount of money. I was reaching out to some other commissioners and saying, how are you addressing this? How are you addressing the money? And I've heard from a number of them, and I respect their candor for saying, we just don't need it. And we said to our public health folks, hey guys, could we have a little bit of scrutiny here on what this money is going to be used for, and not just take it for the sake of taking it, but then actually send some back. Now we know sending it back is obviously, we can't then promise that it will be used better somewhere else. But I want to make sure that we're not, I mean, that's an enormous amount of money, $322,000 right out of the gate, and then another $322,000. And I'm just wondering at what point we're going to say what we're looking for ways to spend this money. And that was one of the discussions that we've had, and other commissioners have also had those discussions. Director?
So I see Commissioner Kula also maybe.
I was just going to ask Director Manfred if I had just assumed that because I've watched and talked a lot with Director Manfred that she's not going to spend money on things that aren't valuable to the public health of our community, and that if she didn't have money spent, that she would send it back to the state. I wanted to direct that question to her as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Director Manfred?
Thank you both. Yes, absolutely. I think it's hard for me to grasp exactly how much of that money we will utilize and how much would not, but certainly there would not be a rush just to spend money. You know, we would really be looking and talking directly with some of our community-based organizations around what their needs are, because I know that they are experiencing some financial gaps in order to help them support this work, largely around things like transportation and providing translation services for us on site at events and paying their staff to do that rather than relying on volunteers volunteers 100% of the time. So I think that there are some needs. It's hard for me to quantify this, but I can absolutely with 100% certainty say that we will not be using money just to use money. If there are identified needs, then it's wonderful to have a resource to be able to tap into them. And if there aren't, then that money would not be used and it would go back. And that happens occasionally in different pockets of our public health funding. Certainly not always, because generally the amount that we're getting is insufficient to our needs, but there are times where there might be those pockets. And I think it's a good reminder too that the 800,000 for general communicable disease is really absolutely 100% needed as well. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of reportable communicable diseases besides COVID, and each one of those requires in-depth case investigation and sometimes testing food supplies and just wanting to make sure that we don't have a food product on the market that's contaminated, things like that. So that money really does have a purpose outside of COVID.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Ken.
And I just wanted to, again, I have a copy of the agreement right here in front of me. So just looking at it and also recognizing that there are some guardrails and some limitations on what this funding can be used for. And so, and we also have reporting requirements. So we have to report and ensure that we're in compliance with the eligibility criteria on what we can use these funds for. And so if we were to go through, and this runs until the end of this calendar year, so anything that hasn't been spent within that period, we'd be obligated to return those funds to the state. So I mean, there are some guardrails and some conditions that are built into the agreement on how we utilize those funds, reporting requirements, and utilization, and making sure in anything that's not spent of the full amount, we would then in turn return to the state.
Thank you. Appreciate that. A question I have regarding access. Are pharmacies generally dispensing the COVID vaccine?
My understanding that the majority of our pharmacies are providing at least some of the vaccines, not necessarily all three.
So then as far as access goes, if somebody wanted to go get a vaccine, they could go get a vaccine at a pharmacy anywhere around the county?
For the most part, I mean, certainly we have certain geographic areas where there's not much of a pharmacy. I think when we move outside of the McMinnville and Newburgh area, it gets harder. And yes, pharmacies are definitely an option for the majority of folks that live within that venue area.
I'm just trying to get to the access part in terms of barriers and folks not being able to access the vaccine, that a pharmacy would be an option.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Commissioner Berschauer, did you collect your thoughts sufficiently, or should I continue talking?
Thank you, Chair. So I guess I just go back to the whole point of this money in the first place. It was rolled out during when the state was still essentially locked down. We were still trying to reach vaccination levels. And the way that it was sold to counties was that this is to be used for incentives, not only to provide more access to reach more people, but to provide incentives. Now that we know we have the first half and we still seemingly have a pretty large remaining balance on that, I don't really understand why we need a plan to be able to adjust and respond to what we know is needed and roll out the rest of that money and reach those people. To me, that just doesn't really make sense that we need a plan to say, okay, this would be a better option. We need to look at childcare. We need to look at transportation. We need to look at doing some weekend clinics. If we still have a sizable amount of money to do that, I think that there's nothing stopping us from doing it. Parts of the plan are kind of concerning to me. It sort of feels like a waste of money. We're talking about, radio ads and school fairs and live music and food and other types of things that you can focus on youth in order to promote the vaccine, and I'm just not comfortable doing that. And it feels like a waste of money. These are my tax dollars too, as well as yours. And I just don't feel like, you know, for just to take money for the sake of taking money. If we have a sizable amount of money left from the initial allocation, let's retool our process so that we can, you know, make sure the access issue is solved, and use the rest of that on those types of efforts. So at this point, I would not be in a position to want to advance the equity plan. I would like to know the exact dollar amount though, as to what is left.
Just a comment about that is that the state OHA is requiring submission of this plan for the remainder of the money. So the first 322,000 came to us regardless of whether we submitted the plan. And in order to receive the other half of it, 322 and change, we would have to submit this plan. And the object of the game, you know, it's being called a vaccine equity plan to make sure that there are no barriers to specific populations. It seems like the focus of it. I'm looking at the population vaccination rate in each demographic or racial subgroup, and I see that 20% of the Black population in Yamhill County, only 20% have been vaccinated. We see only 33.9% of Hispanic residents have been vaccinated. We see 42% of white residents have been vaccinated. So we're looking at significant percentages of populations that have either not gotten vaccinated, and for whatever reason, did they choose not to get vaccinated? Were they unable to access the vaccine? Did they not know about it? These are all questions, but I am wondering about these statistics, and do they necessarily mean that people couldn't get them, or that maybe they didn't want them? And the first thing that pops into my mind, and I'm thinking about of a Black doctor I've been working with who says, hey, I know people who are not comfortable getting the vaccine because they remember Tuskegee, and they remember that we experimented on Black men, and they're just going, oh, this is an experimental drug. We're gonna hold back and wait and see. So maybe there's that component. And then we're supposed to address vaccine hesitancy. So there's that. And then folks in the Hispanic community, only ostensibly 34% have chosen the vaccine, access the vaccine. So the question is could they not, or do they choose not to? And that's where I'm wondering, do we have any information on that? Or
I think
thoughts?
it's a combination. I mean, sorry, that was directed towards me. I think it's what I'm understanding, and what I hear from community members, what I hear from our community partners, is that it's a combination of those things, that all of those things exist. And without, doing, robust surveying and things like that, I can't parcel out how much of what is what, but I think all of those things exist. And I think your statement around trust in medications and injections and things like that is absolutely true, and it is called out in our plan. Just distrust in general, which is huge and understandable with some of the significant atrocities that have happened to our Black community over the course of our country's history, for certain. So those are definitely pieces of what is built into our plan in terms of recognition of what may be prompting people to elect or not elect the vaccine.
Thank you. Commissioner Kula, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, thank you, Chair. Director Manfred, would it be appropriate to use some of the funds to commission surveys specifically to find out what's the population of people who are unable to access it versus those who don't have an interest in it? Or what are their barriers? Is that an appropriate use of it?
I believe so. I'm going to kind of look to Ken too, who may have it in front of him. But I believe if it is to understand what might be causing the statistics that we're seeing, I believe we could use it for that.
I want to make sure, though, that in asking people why they're not being vaccinated, it's not a punitive question. So in other words, if I said, hey, why aren't you being vaccinated? Or, why have you chosen not to be vaccinated? That can, I would think, be seen as invasive to some degree, that there are people who are just saying, no, thank you, I've chosen not to, and that's all you need to know. It's kind of like when you get a knock on the door, you're just saying, this is a little bit too invasive. If I wanted the vaccine, I can get the vaccine, but you need to just, or you guys need to back off now, is what I'm wondering. Where do we draw the line? Commissioner?
Chair, I know that there's very competent survey companies. DHM is one that we see their survey results pretty regularly. I presume that they have the ability to connect with people, since they do this all the time, specific to a series of questions that we need answers to.
Yeah, I just want to be careful. I know that there are some suggestions that people go door to door and knock on doors and let people know about the vaccine, and that's concerning. But and also phones, no one's picking up their phone anymore. I don't know. I want to make sure it's accurate. Director Manfred.
One thing that, sorry, Ken, did you?
Can I just really quickly respond to the question that was posed? Because I know it was kind of thrown to me, but as far as the eligibility for surveys, while it's not specifically, I'm kind of going through this, I would just throw out there that the intent of these funds and this plan is to address barriers for those that want to get a vaccine. And so if we need to have further understanding of what those barriers are, I think surveys would be an important tool that, as part of this plan, and maybe we may even need to add that additional language about continually updating and surveying and monitoring, because when you're drafting a plan, you need to be able to adapt a plan to, if you have an unidentified, a barrier hasn't been identified when we drafted the plan, but it comes apparent based on data and feedback that we're getting to the plan, to be able to adapt to that, to address that potential barrier. It seemed like it would be, definitely part of this overall plan and eligible for use for using the funds for this grant.
Thank you, Ken. Director Manfred?
I was just going to share, one of the things that I've heard from a number of my counterparts in other communities is that there is a population of individuals who are really wanting a lot of anonymity when they get their vaccine. And that is where we have seen things like, being in neighborhood complexes, knocking on doors, going to different places has been beneficial, because people have shared that they want to get vaccinated, but they don't necessarily want their neighbor or someone else to know. And so going into a clinic, somehow the COVID vaccine for some folks has become, a source of stigma. And so there is that piece that I think is just an added layer that is an important piece for us to think about and consider if that's happening in our community as well.
Thank you. I think, as one of the commissioners I spoke with yesterday said, at some point in time, we have to say, we've made the vaccine available. It's virtually impossible not to know that this is available. We've reached out, we've done so very much to try to break down those barriers, not that we can't continue to do that, but I'm thinking, at what point do we say, yeah, we've done everything we can do? Now it almost gets to the point of, I don't want to use the term ridiculousness, where we're kind of beating the bushes to see, who isn't vaccinated. You're not vaccinated, come with me. I just want to make sure that it's not reaching the point where, as this other commissioner says, he says, look, at some point we have to say we've done what we were supposed to do. Anyhow, Commissioner Berschauer, were you trying to unmute?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I go back to the whole original purpose of this money. It was not to be a research project. It was to actually get the numbers of vaccinated people, the percentages of vaccinated people up in order to open the state up again. That was the entire premise of this. We are now open. We have, significantly reduce the number of vaccines we are giving on a county level per month. And again, there is not a single human being in the state that does not know what COVID is, or that there is a vaccine now out there. Whether they want it or not is their own choice. If there's lack of access, or if we need to do some creative things in terms of childcare or evening or weekend clinics, I'm all for doing that. But it sounds like we have enough money to do it and get it done. I just don't see where the benefit of having another $322,000 is going to dramatically, increase our numbers or make our county better off, safer. I think we've reached sort of that saturation point, and there might be, some smaller segments of society that have these barriers for whatever reason, but it sounds like we still have plenty of funds to go after that. So I'm not somebody who's just going to take taxpayer funding just for the sake of taking it. It doesn't feel right to me, and certainly the focus on children, I really have a problem with.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Bershauer, I don't see a primary focus on children in this, but the fact remains that public schools are one of the best places for children to actually access the vaccine, or vaccines in general, so that they don't have to have a parent take them somewhere else when that parent may not have the time during the time when vaccine clinics are open. So I just want to note that this is, as we started in the beginning of the vaccine equity plan, it lists all the groups of people and kind of demographics in the county by how many of them have had or not had the vaccine yet. And there's a significant number of people in our county who haven't. I do want to say that, it was like 2 months ago, you also told us that we'd reached a saturation point in our county, and we clearly haven't, and the evidence tells us, and our director has told us, and I hear it from people in the community, that people are still accessing the vaccine. I remember that in February, 500 new doses was a big deal because we were struggling to get new doses. So just vaccinating 500 people in February was a big deal. I recognize that you believe that this vaccine equity plan and the funding associated with it is tied to the 70% number and to the reopening, and you're welcome to believe that. I don't understand that to be the case. I understand that the governor and the OHA have indicated that getting 80% of folks in the state vaccinated is ultimately their goal. We know that there are people still seeking out the vaccine and needing help in getting it. I feel like this is a very appropriate use of that money. And Director Manfred has indicated that if we don't use it, we will return it to the state, but that as long as they're using it to promote access to the vaccine, let people know where it is available, let people removing barriers to particular communities, I support this 100%. I do want to note that despite your continued assertions that we've reached saturation, all the evidence suggests that we have not. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick rebuttal to that. Apparently we have not used any of that initial round of funding to actually provide better access. We have used it for creating a plan. So my position is that let's go use the rest of it on solving some of these issues. We know what they are. They're now clearly laid out in front of us. Let's spend the money on that. I just don't see a justification at this point for pulling another $330,000 of taxpayer money to go and chase, radio ads and fairs and food and incentives. And that is what other counties have used this money for. And that was the purpose, was to get to that 70% faster. So at this point, I just don't see a justification for pulling in more money.
Okay, so a couple of things. We're not required to submit this until August, correct, Director Manfred?
That's my understanding.
We have a date certain, it's an August date to submit this plan or forfeit $322,000. I think since we do have time, my recommendation would be, since we're at least two commissioners are having a lot of questions about this and about different aspects of it, that we table this, continue to have more discussion, and then perhaps before we reach the drop dead deadline for submitting this, we can revisit it. Because I think at this point, it would not be something that the majority of the board would be in agreement on, but I don't think that that means it's dead. I think it means that we can perhaps revisit it and come back and address some of the concerns that we have about it. That would be my recommendation. Do we have a date? Is it the end of August? Middle of August, the end of August?
August 31st
Okay.
is when the submission is due to the state.
Okay, so that since Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that's good. I would also take it a step further and say that I would like to see a budget that outlines what we've spent so far, what's left, and how we're going to spend the remaining funds to address some of these issues now, because we know these are problems. We know where the money should go. And I want to see a plan as to how we're going to spend the rest of the money so that we can address these issues and make sure that we're actually getting more people vaccinated, if that's the plan and the purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ken.
Well, and the one part that I would highlight is, part of this plan, while it doesn't have financial numbers that are tied to the plan, but the intent of the plan is to outline the strategies that we'd be using those funds to use. And so then that makes sense that right now the effort has been putting together the plan and concentrating on that. And we haven't been spending the funds because we haven't adopted a plan yet to start implementing these strategies that are identified in this plan. So that's just something that I would just highlight. And if we need to build a financial summary or build, as part of this for each category on what funds are going to be available, that's another option that could be approached with this. But again, that was the intent of these funds, was to develop a plan and identify those strategies and then have the funding in order to implement those strategies identified in this plan.
Thank you, Ken. Commissioner Bershauer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate that, Ken, and I agree, but it doesn't take $300,000 to write up a plan, that especially the one that we saw. So there's plenty of money left in there. And we don't need permission from OHA to tell us how we need to go out and best serve our constituents. So that's what I would like to see as the next step, not only delaying this decision maybe, but coming up with a strategy for how we're going to spend the rest of the initial allocation. I think I just go back to the point where, we don't need permission to do the right thing. We're going to do it anyway. So let's see what that looks like and see if we can improve access for these vaccines. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of time, is there a specific time, Director Manfred or Ken, in terms of time that would be needed to address those questions and come back with more information? I want to make sure that we do have time, appears that we do, to address this before we have to submit the plan. I'm looking for a date here.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding correctly, there is support for public health to continue the work that's outlaid in the plan that is related to access and reducing barriers and things like that. So there is support for us to continue to do that work. And if I'm understanding correctly, there is a point in time where you want to revisit to see how much money has been spent and maybe a refresh on the data that's in the plan to see if continued work is still needing. Am I understanding that correctly?
Commissioner Bershauer, is that what you're asking?
Chair and Director Manfred, yeah, I would say that you have the plan, and I trust that you know where these barriers are and you know how to get them done. My feeling is that we should shift now to spending the rest of the money, whatever that number is, on directly solving some of those problems. So let's move out of the planning phase. What you put together was excellent. I personally have an issue with the children and getting children vaccinated at schools but that's another topic, and we've discussed that at depth. My issue is that I don't want to spend any more time planning. I want to spend the rest of the money doing. And I don't feel like we need permission from OHA to do what we need to do. So that was my feeling.
Commissioner Kula.
Thank you, Chair. I think that Director Manfred's question, forgive me for putting words into your mouth, Director Manfred, was, is HHS following this vaccine equity plan when spending the money that came to us? Because it sounds like we're essentially approving it without approving it. So that would be my question to my colleagues is, are we approving the plan right now by giving the green light to Director Manfred to use this money according to the plan?
From what I am understanding, unless I'm misunderstanding, is that if you read the answers to the questions, it seems that this is almost a retrospective. This is what we have been doing. This is what we have been doing. We're going to continue to do that. We plan to continue working with our partners. There seems to be a lot of that referenced here in answers to the questions. So I don't know that it's new work. It's a continuation of what we have been doing. Did I misunderstand that, Director Manfred, from what I'm reading?
There's definitely some redundancy potentially in some of the questions. I think there are questions that are asking specifics around what did you do? And then other questions, what will you do? And so in a lot of the what will you do questions, there is reference to we will continue to do the work that has been being done for sure. And then identify additional barriers. And then there's some other language around, some of the things like transportation that we have not had an active plan around. We've had some resource we've been able to share, but it has been, I wouldn't call it an active plan. So that's just an example of some of the augmented work that we would like to do.
Thank you. Ken.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, and share a little bit more, because with the timelines associated with when we were presented with this funding and grant proposal was in the early part of June. I believe the board reviewed and approved this in the first week of June. I believe it was June 9th. Director Manfred, we first brought this, I believe she emailed the first draft on June 18th. And we've had several discussions around the vaccine, this equity plan, this proposal that's been prepared, and with a lot of the questions and the information, so there's been some timelines. And that's contributing to really the large scale kind of spending on the initial allocation that we've received. And the time that it's taken that we're here having this discussion today, I think it's important, because it's, trying to be responsible and making sure that we're utilizing the funds in a manner that's consistent with the policy directive, given by the board. And so if there is consensus today to go ahead and start proceeding and implementing some of the strategies that Director Manfred has identified in this plan and things that we haven't done, we can start doing that to help paint a, be able to present a picture of what the funding looks like, the fund utilization, the implementation, and whether or not there's sufficient funds in the initial allocation that's been released, or if we're going to need to submit this to then, get the second tier of funds released. We can proceed that way, as long as it's clear that there's, consensus of the board that public health proceed this way.
Commissioners?
Well, I would, Chair, I would encourage us to approve the vaccine equity plan now, and so that we can adopt it. And then in honor of Commissioner Berschauer's questions, at the same time, begin developing, direct public health to draft a budget for both the remaining amount of money, including how to spend it and the timeline, and then also a proposal for spending the second round of money, including how and when. And so that would be my proposal. I think it honors both Commissioner Berschauer's very legitimate concerns, while also getting us going with a plan that's been developed and had money spent on it.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. You know, I respect that, Commissioner Kula. I just feel like there was not a plan necessary to spend this initial allocation. We've seen counties spend it on, you know, iTunes gift cards for incentives and various other things. There really wasn't a plan associated with how to release these funds and improve vaccination levels. So I don't feel that we need permission from OHA to do that. I would like to see, because I feel like we owe it to taxpayers across the state. This is their money. You know, how we're going to do this and spend this money responsibly. I would love to see it from all other counties too that took the money. Whether or not we will remains to be seen. But you know, at this point, I feel like we are sitting on a substantial amount of money, and we don't need permission to spend it wisely. And I trust that based on some of these answers that Director Manfred knows how to spend it in the best ways. But I just don't see, for the next round, I just don't see the justification of needing another $330,000. I'm not seeing that. So that's where I'm getting stuck on.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kula.
Well, Chair, I should make sure that you have an opportunity rather than us going. Did you want to add anything before I added something?
Commissioner Kula, you never have to worry about me getting a word in edgewise, because I will find a way. So carry
That's
on.
true. That's very true. By the way, it was really great seeing you in person. Oh, okay, side
Oh, I'm
note.
sure that was the highlight of your day, Commissioner. Carry on.
Hey, I could see you really well. I'll just say that. I was across the way. Commissioner Berschauer, I think that for our own internal accountability, using this money because of your expressed concerns about how this money might be used, clearly we don't need to report this to the OHA in the detail that you had requested, but I do think it's still valuable for us to know exactly how the money's being spent and the plan for spending it. Again, how we're going to spend it is going to be driven by the vaccine equity plan. They're not going to spend the money outside of the vaccine equity plan. So I think we should adopt it and approve it. But the second point is that we don't need to, presumably, we can not accept the check, the transfer from OHA for the second tranche if we as commissioners, with the guidance of our public health director, don't feel like it's going to be put to the best use in our community.
Thank you for that, Commissioner. A couple of things that to Commissioner Berschauer's point, and I think I've been very vocal about this as well, and that is concerns about the push to vaccinate kids, which we know we're seeing some recommendations not to do that. However, that is part of the push, and it's part of the plan. One of the things that I see if I can find it here, where it talks about food and live music. That to me looks an awful lot like bread and circuses, carnivals, and get your jab. And I'm really, those are the types of things when we early on heard about incentives, where the governor, I believe we were all on the same call, where the governor was talking about incentives and pizza and beer, and if you want to do that, or you could do gift cards, or I mean all of that. But live music and food looks to me like an incentive. And I know I was on a call where someone in Newburgh was talking about getting the kids vaccinated and giving them 2 pieces of pizza. Now that concerns me, because kids being kids, pizza is a big deal. So the music, the live music and the food, that part of these types of a plan, while I understand breaking down barriers, that is also my concern, which is why I'm suggesting that because the way it looks right now, I'm seeing two commissioners who are concerned enough to perhaps say no to this. I would like to forestall it, not necessarily say it can happen, but can it happen in a way that is going to address those concerns that we all have? The money part for me from day one, I was wondering, what are we going to do with 645 when we've been doing it all along? Okay, so I can understand the need for more money to continue to do the work in terms of access and things like that, but we're looking at $645,000. And do we move the needle? I mean, do we move the needle in with that amount of money? Is it going to make a difference that we only have 20% population, Black members of our community, 20% of that population vaccinated? Will it move the needle anymore for us to have another $322,000? And how will we do that? So there's this there's the ethics involved, there's the financial, there's the fiscal responsibility, and then there's also the concern about the kids and the music and the food. So I'm trying to keep this thing alive, and because right now it would die. I'm trying to keep it alive. So, cut me some slack here, folks. If we find a way to keep it alive, then I say let's keep it alive. If our concerns are enough to say no, then this is where it goes, and it dies here today. So it's on life support. I'm going to leave it up to you, Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. I'm fine postponing it. And to your point earlier about Commissioner Pope's concerns and thoughts about how they were going to spend the money, and they sort of came to the conclusion that there's no way they could responsibly. There's another county commissioner I talked to, I won't name which county, but they decided that they were going to go buy UTVs with this money because they wanted to drive out into the middle of farmland and give farmers the vaccine. Now, you could take that two ways. One way is, oh, that's creative. The other way is, wow, what a significant waste of my money. That's what I am weighing here, is what are we actually going to spend this money on? If it's things that make sense, that do actually provide, direct access and improves our vaccination levels, great. But if it's some of this other stuff where we have to start getting creative in how we spend money just for the sake of spending it, I can't represent that to my constituents. It feels like, it feels wrong, and it feels like a waste of money. And again, these are our tax dollars too. So, but I'm fine postponing the discussion if that's what we want to do.
So to the question, as far as if we were to postpone it, what is it that we would see change that would change address our concerns? And that's what I know Commissioner Kula, you're okay with signing off on it now, but Commissioner Berschauer, what do you need to see in order for us to give this thing a blessing and send it off to Salem?
Yeah, absolutely. I initially want to see how much money is left in the initial allocation. I want to see, not super specific, but a plan for how to spend the rest of it, given what we know with transportation barriers, childcare barriers, maybe weekend and evening clinics. How are we going to spend that money so that it directly affects constituents in a positive way? And then if there's data at the end of that says, hey, we still have this segment of our population that hasn't been, positively impacted, or we have, people over here who really need it and they haven't had access, then that would change my mind. But at this point, I'm not seeing it. So it's very difficult for me to bridge that gap. And I realize we're under a timeline, but perhaps if we roll this out quickly, then by the end of August, we could have some indication of just how effective our plan is, and if there's a greater need. But again, I will go back to the debates that we've had over children being vaccinated. We've all seen the news. We know that there's ample warning in terms of getting children vaccinated. This is why we so emotionally pushed for parental consent. And that is still a big issue for me. So, the vaccine equity plan that puts a lot of emphasis on targeting children as young as 12, that does not sit well with me. So that's the piece of it that I would push back on individually. The rest of it is fine. So I hope that helps kind of lay out where to go from here, at least from my perspective, but I'm open to other suggestions as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kula.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Bershauer, for kind of laying out your expectations and what you understand to be or what your concerns are. I do want to note that the line about that includes live music and food. I know specifically that Unidos has been hosting and organizing particular events that include, as it notes in the equity plan, resource fairs. And Miriam at Unidos has been very enthusiastic about how effective that is at getting people into a space, building community among folks that sometimes it's hard to reach them, specifically having it on the weekend and having other resources available, whether that's information on accessing childcare or English language classes or signing up for WIC or Oregon Health Plan. There's a lot of benefits of using money to host these kinds of events. I also want to note that that particular one does say 12 to 17-year-olds, and the benefit of that is that parents and their children, parents and their 12 to 17-year-olds have been able to also get vaccinated at the same time, rather than trying to figure out how to access it at multiple different times in different places. So Miriam expressed a great deal of enthusiasm and at the effectiveness and the benefit of those particular events. So that kind of goes back to what one of Commissioner Sterrett's concerns around the incentives, and then to one of Commissioner Bershauer's concerns around parental consent for vaccines, is that they're making them available at the same time.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I guess where it stands now is we still have some concerns, and a couple of issues have risen to the fore here. And I'm wondering, Director Manfred, does this give you enough of an idea of what the stumbling blocks might be to this, so that we could consider putting it back on the agenda? Again, I'm looking at the very first line here. Yamhill County is committed to ensuring equitable vaccine access for all eligible people. And that includes specific strategies and partnerships to identify and provide access to those who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID and those where vaccine access might be difficult. So that's the underlying, reason for doing this, and that needs to be addressed. So that we've had issues brought up about the money and about kids. So if that gives you something to go on, maybe we can come back, kick it around a little bit more, and then hopefully come to some kind of once again, a consensus that there is a way to do this and address the concerns of a couple of the commissioners.
Yep, I believe so. And I will say I certainly have no interest in receiving money that we don't have a purpose for that is meaningful, right? So I'm 100% with you all with that. I think at this point, it's just really hard for me to say if we'll need that money or not. And so I think taking a pause from that perspective is absolutely fine. And coming back to see if those additional funds are needed. I do think that there's value in having this equity plan in place. I think I do still have some questions related to, it sounds like you're okay for the most part for us to move forward with the things in this plan that we can spend the money on. So I just want to confirm that, even though we're not submitting this plan to the Oregon Health Authority, that there is some level of alignment with some of the concerns you mentioned, but there is support for public health to move forward with this plan utilizing the funding that's already come to us.
Thank you. I think that with the fact that, as I mentioned, there's a lot of, this is what we've done, we're going to continue to do it. I think that's clear. So that's something we would be doing anyway. But Commissioner Bershauer?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to suggest a date that we can pick this discussion back up. And I'm weighing, Ken said it was August 31st was the deadline. Is that correct? So I'm weighing that with, being able to have some data coming back and some, indication of how the efforts are going. So maybe August 19th, I don't know if that would give enough time. I mean, I would assume it would because the plan's already drafted, but if we take it up on August 19th and sort of come back and assess what's in front of us, then does that sound amenable?
I'm wondering if that gives, Director Manfred, does that give you enough time? I know that's pretty close to that's, we're looking at another, yeah, is that acceptable?
Yeah, I think that will work. I think if there aren't substantial changes to the plan to submit, right, which it doesn't sound like we anticipate that being the issue per se, we could certainly have a point in time of what we have in the works as far as any spending of dollars, as well as where we stand in terms of what's been spent already.
Thank you. Ken, does that sound like a plan?
I believe so. I'll rely on Director Manfred, in her opinion, and if she feels comfortable with that, I think we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Everybody okay with that? All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll come back with, and if there are periodic updates or information that you could update us with along the way, that would be helpful. So we don't, we'll come to the 19th knowing exactly where we're going to land on this. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. I think you're not to go anywhere again because we have the restaurant licensing fee. So not so fast. Let's see. I have lost my place. Okay, so that's item number.
Oh yeah, you got it.
Okay, so that's item number 2, and we're going to go ahead and continue that until August 19th. And then item number 3, which we've added to old business, has to do with the consideration of the increase to restaurant licensing fees. And you've given us some information. Appreciate that. We've talked about this for a really long time. And we're talking about some of the, there was a request for an increase for restaurant licensing fees, and maybe you can just bring us back up to speed, Director Manfred.
Sure, I can give a quick summary of the information shared. And I'll start with just a little bit of historic context that I think is relevant and important. So roughly 10 years ago or so, looking at a sort of analysis of our costs and revenue, it became apparent 2 things. One is that the rates that public health was charging for their restaurant license fees were far below that of what the Oregon Health Authority allows, but more importantly, we're far below what was covering the costs of our program. And it is a fee-driven program, meaning that generally speaking, the fees collected for the licenses are what provide the funding for the program, which is largely staff time. And so in doing this review, there was not a desire at that point to drastically increase the rates of our restaurants. That just didn't feel right. We didn't want to do that. And so rather than doing, 500% increase, we decided let's just do a small incremental 5% each year until we reach the point of the licensing fees covering the costs of our program. And that's what we've been doing up until now. We haven't reached that threshold. So without this proposed increase, we have a deficit, but even with this 5% proposed increase, we're still roughly $99,000 short in our annual budget to cover the cost of those programs. And we supplement that with the county general fund that comes to us that makes up about 4% of our budget. So that's sort of the status of where we're at right now. And the proposed 5% increase, what that really looks like in dollars is between $2 per license and $40 per license, with that $40 per license being venues that have 150 or more seats in them. So we don't have very many of them, but we do have some. So most people are definitely going to be under that $40 for their annual fee increase, more likely in the avenue, if you will, around $10. Even that, I recognize, given all that our businesses have been through, could be a lot, and so I want to be really sensitive to that, and think that the dollars, it is helpful to see that in a numeric value in that way. we had lots of conversation internally around the fees. We had them internally with staff. We had them with the Board of Health around this, particularly because of where we're at as a community and the things that have, our businesses have had to go through over the course of this last year. And so had we not had this ability for not only the increase in their license fee, but also the totality of their licenses to be covered through this grant program, should that be continued, I wouldn't have even proposed the 5%. But because we can capture some of that to supplement and support our budget needs and not have that cost be passed to our businesses, it felt like a win-win that we could make both of those things happen. And so really the proposal is to continue with that 5% rate increase, which is again between $2 and $40. But we request that the board allow that those grant dollars to roll over so that our businesses can tap into that and have those license charges covered. And in addition to that, increase and expand that program beyond just the brick and mortar facilities to allow mobiles and caterers to also be able to go into that grant program. And so I did provide some information to you all, including the numbers of facilities. Interestingly enough, 2021, we actually are starting to see an increase in facilities from 252 to 255 in our brick and mortar, a slight decrease, excuse me, from 74 to 71 in our mobile units. And there is information there around the grant program and the uptake in terms of the number of folks that proceeded to go into the grant program. So that's all there for you to review. We do think that there'll be a large, again, this is just our assumption, but we do anticipate that there would be a larger uptake of the grant program this go around. So previously the grant program was implemented after the renewal process really took place. And so we did send information out to all of the brick and mortar folks that were eligible. We sent information out, we had conversations with them as our restaurant inspectors and things were out and about. But this go around, should we move forward with this, we would include the information about this right in the renewal letter itself that goes out in October so that they had that with that. And so we think that there may be a more likely increase in people using that because instead of having both those facilities that can get their fee covered to begin with, there was also, the folks that could have it be reimbursed. And we just need to, that wouldn't be an option, right? They just get it covered right from the get-go. So we think there'll be more people doing that. We fully intend to do everything we possibly can to make sure that all of the operators know how to access this and to make it as easy as possible. We can share things again through the renewal letters. We share those in English, and we can share that information about the grant program in English and Spanish, getting information out through social media, and then having the operators, be able to connect to that. So if someone's coming in to pay for their license, making sure that they saw that letter and that they're not wanting to partake in that opportunity as well.
Question, so this began, the 5% annually began 10 years ago. So
it was roughly 10 years ago. I would need to go back and I don't have the exact date, but it's been several years that we've been incrementally increasing.
So for the last 10 years, restaurant licensees know that there will be a 5% increase every year, or has been typically, if they've been in business for a while.
I think that would be expected. Yeah. If they've been with us in Yamaha County for a while, that has been the practice.
And so just to recap, that this would be the entire restaurant license fee would be covered by the grant program, and it's been expanded to include mobile food units as well, which we didn't have in the first round of grants. Okay, commissioners, questions? Commissioner Burschauer.
Thank you, Chair. Director Manfred, so what is the increase though in the cost of actually providing the program? I mean, are we outpacing the 5% increase yearly?
So that is really dependent on the collective bargaining agreement that's passed every 3 years, as well as increased costs to PERS and benefits and things like that. So I would say it varies from contract to contract. Certainly this contract year, there were substantial increases to our personnel costs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kula, any questions, comments?
I don't have any questions, Chair. Thank you. But I do think that this is a good win-win situation, that we continue to have businesses that are seeking this regulated status bear the costs rather than having general taxpayers bear the cost. And in this case, also are able to use our, the CARES Act funding and ARPA dollars if needed to continue funding this, so that licensees, permit holders don't bear the costs this year. And I really appreciate the suggestion to add mobile units to this.
Thank you.
My hope is that more people continue to use it and take advantage of the program.
Thank you. I'm wondering if we can, just as far as this year is covered, but next year we would then go back to the 5% increase. Is that correct? Is that what we would be doing by approving this now, approving it for now and for 2 years? Or
No, so these are done annually.
annually?
So
Okay.
come next June, I would be before you again with the rates, and I would hate to, typically we've been raising them 5%, but I really would like to, reserve sort of what that decision would be, or my recommendation at least, until we get closer to that time, just given who knows what kind of circumstances might be before us.
So then this particular year, we would be, the question is to suggest to increase the 5%, but then they would be covered. So then that rate has already been increased when we go into next year.
That's correct. That would be the baseline of which we would be making any decisions on for licenses that would be renewed January 2023.
Thank you. Commissioner Berschauer?
Thank you, Chair. So I guess my concern, though, is the message. Number one, the message it's sending to our small businesses, especially restaurants who are still struggling to get out of COVID. And practically speaking, if we do this, then they're going to feel upwards of a 10% increase when they go to pay next year, right? It's going to be a significant jump from where they are now. And I've been asking a few restaurants around town, one in particular, in terms of how they're doing through this process and coming out of COVID. And I just want to read this. It's very brief, but it's from Kate's Thai food truck. You probably have been there. But it says, it's been about 5 months that meat and other products that we use in the food industry, their prices are increasing weekly and they keep going up. For example, in February of this year, 40 pounds of fresh chicken meat was $40 per box. Now it's $97.80. Cooking oil was $19.50 per 5 gallon. Now it's $52, etc. She's been using tips that the customers give her to subsidize the cost of these supplies in order to keep the selling price low for her customers. And then she goes on to say, I'm sorry, but I have to charge now for credit card usage. And I wouldn't have been able to stay in business if it weren't for the low parking space rates and for her family helping her out. So I can't imagine that Kate is alone. We're certainly seeing inflationary costs go up across the board, and it's directly impacting our restaurants. So I am very concerned about the message that this sends, that we're gonna continue to increase 5% this particular year. I'm in full support of extending the grant program. I think that's fantastic. But I don't like how the effect of doing this year, even if it's covered by grant funds, that next year it's going to feel like a 10% increase. So I personally would be in favor of no increase this year. We can revisit it next year. And if we need to increase it next year, that's a debate for another time. But I personally am not comfortable with sending this message right now.
But if we increase it this year, it will be covered by a grant. So it's not out of pocket, the increase nor the fee itself.
Yes, but they're going to feel it next year when we come back and say it's another 5%. And when by the way, you didn't pay that last year, but now you're going to pay the full 10% impact. So that's my concern, is I would rather have it be a gradual increase, because inflationary costs are not going to get any better, especially in the next year or so. That's what every economist has predicted. So that's my concern, is that we're going to get to a point where we say, well, we're out of grant funds, and oh, by the way, we committed to this 5% yearly increase. And in the meantime, if we can't cover the budget of providing the program, then I think we need to look at using some of those additional funds to cover it in the meantime. But I just am personally not comfortable with sending the message to our restaurants that we're going to increase licensing fees, even if we are temporarily giving them a Band-Aid to cover it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Director Manfred.
I just wanted just a point of clarification, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Even if we were to increase it, whether we increase it this year or not, that has no bearing or no impact on whether there's a decision made to increase it next year. So theoretically, there could be a decision to increase the 5% while we have this grant coverage. And it could be that next year there's a decision to hold and not do an increase. I don't know what that decision will be made. I don't know what my recommendation at that time will be, but I just want to make it clear that it doesn't automatically mean that there would be a 5% increase for the following year. We've done this as our past practice to try to keep up with our costs and get there, but that doesn't mean that that's a requirement moving forward.
Why wouldn't there be if there has been for the past 10 years and we're not being made whole by what we're charging?
Oh yeah, so I'm not saying that it wouldn't be a good business decision to make, to continue to increase those. I think back to sort of this, where are our businesses at? How far into this recovery phase are we as a community, as businesses? I think those would be the types of questions we'd be asking. Are there additional funds that can continue to support a grant program? I think those would be the questions I'd be asking come June or May, June, as we're figuring out our rates.
Thank you. Ken, did you want to say something at this point?
No, and I was just going to add, I think Director Manfred covered very well, some of my thoughts as well. And just this is why we do this, the fee review on an annual basis as well, in order to facilitate these discussions and look at the fees that we're charging, because, keeping in mind that we do have operations and services that are critical that we provide, and making sure that we're able to continue those services. And it's never easy, and we never take it lightly when we're looking at fee increases, and this is why we do it on an annual basis. And so this would be subject to another discussion come June.
Commissioner Kula. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Chair. I think that when we make our decisions, we need to both be aware of the message that they're sending, but also about the practical implications behind that message. And I think that from my perspective, it's important that the permit holders cover as much of the cost of providing the inspection service as possible, rather than putting it off, but still incurring that cost, which then goes on to general fund, to property taxes. And so I just think that's important that, and we talk about systems development charges, right? And one of the purposes of them is to make sure that the person who's doing the development is covering the cost rather than other people. It's not a great one because we know that some of those costs are overly high, but planning development permits, they cover the costs of doing the work. I think it's important restaurant owners know that they're subject to these fees, and I'm super grateful that that Commissioner Sterrett got this ball rolling with the fee waivers, as it were. So I think that we should extend it and add the gradual 5% to make sure that permit holders are the ones paying it rather than property taxpayers.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. And Commissioner Kula, I don't disagree with the mechanics and who should be responsible for it. That's not what I'm saying. But as we've seen from the response from the grants, not everyone is taking advantage of this. So some people will be paying 5% more this year. And again, I would rather take the break now than next year. I just think it makes more sense. People are slowly trying to climb out of COVID. And as we're seeing, some pretty substantial inflationary costs when it comes to their supply chain. It doesn't make me feel good to increase it on anyone this year, and I'm simply not inclined to do so. I think that come next year, if it looks like our economy is rebounding and folks are doing just fine, great. We can look at it then. But I also want to make a point to say that our cost of providing this service is also going up, and government has not trimmed back in the same way that the private industry has. And so, you know, it's just sort of assumed that it's going to continue to cost us more to do this because of these CBAs or whatever they are. And yet the discussion never centers around that. So as of this year, I'm inclined to say no increase, and we can address it next year.
Okay, can I respond to that, Commissioner Bershauer? Because I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. If we've been increasing fees to cover our costs and we haven't even covered our costs for 10 years, and if our fees have been significantly lower than neighboring counties or comparably populated counties, we would need to catch up. Now, if we're going to be using grant funds, which we are not coming from the general fund to cover this 5% increase, it's not coming out of their pockets. None of it is. And then next year, we're going to have to revisit it because we're not going to stop increasing the cost because we just had another union contract, which means that our employee costs, I believe, what are we paying? 42% of our budget is going to personnel costs. So as we have these increases in union contract, the costs, it's going to go up. And so as you mentioned, it's not what's happening in the private sector. They're not getting 18% increases or 5% increases. They're just trying to stay alive. But government can just keep adding these costs because we can just get them from the taxpayers. So I see what you're saying. I'm just wondering, how do we recoup these costs? This year we can do it for free, even though it's not for free. Next year, it's going to come out of their pocket. And this year we can have the 5% to cover our costs more without having it touch them. That's just my devil's advocate here.
Yeah, and Chair, I understand that. As we've seen though, not everyone's going to participate in the grant program. So if we do this, we are effectively raising their rates by 5% because not everyone is getting a grant. Now, if we just say we're going to pay everybody's licensing fee across the board and they don't have a choice, that's a different topic. But that's not the case. We are going to be raising 5% on some people who don't participate in the grant process. And if we revisit it next year and it's another 5%, then it's 10. And those businesses who did participate in the grant program will feel the 10% increase next year. So I get that we have to provide the service and we have to pay for it some way. I am just not comfortable with, unless we say we're covering everybody's licensing fees this year, not just a select few, but everybody's, so that nobody feels the 5% increase, then I'm not comfortable raising it on some people and not others.
We are saying that though, because what we're saying, instead of last time when we had to catch up to people and say, hey, we'll give you a rebate, hey, we'll pay what you already paid. This time it's a whole different ballgame because we're getting people at the point of, this is when you renew. Not we're going to repay you for having renewed. So virtually everybody gets a notice that says your license fee is due. Here's how you not pay it. Here's how you don't have to pay it. And it's because I went over this time and time again with Ken Huffer and Director Manfred, is how easy is this going to be? So it's just not one of these wonky things where people have to apply for a grant and some people say it's just not worth it. So Ken, do you want to explain how and again, I get what you're saying because I agree with you. This is not the time to increase fees on restaurants of all businesses. But Ken, can you just describe the mechanics of how this is going to be user friendly?
Yeah, and we're still working on the specifics on what the mechanics are going to look like as far as the entry, so we're still working on that. But I think timing is everything when it comes to this type of proposal. And the previous one, and I know we've said it multiple times, but the timing in which that program was implemented you know, you had folks that are maybe making a decision, well, I already paid it for this year. I could take the time and go through this grant portal and make a request for the $42 that I paid for my licensing fee, or, you know, I'm not worried about it. I'm just, you know, I'm not interested in doing that. Here, it's going to be rolled out at the start. We're going to be doing all the information when the period opens up, the renewal period, which starts in October. All that information is going to be readily available. We're looking at simplifying the process. We still want the ability, because it is, we have to be able to report on the use of those funds to ensure that we're compliant with the, depending on the funds that we're using, to make sure that we can make those reports and have follow-up questions potentially, you know, with people that have elected to opt into that. And so I think more than anything, I think the numbers that we saw from last year, it was a timing on when it was rolled out. And then it was also, we had you know, and this, we have expanding it. We are proposing to expand almost, in fact, I think it does cover all categories of anyone who's required to have a restaurant licensing or have this license in place would be eligible for these grant funds to cover the costs for the renewal for that.
But I just want to, if you
Yeah.
could underscore the fact that it's not a grant application that you have to, it's basically, can you illustrate more how easy this is going to be?
It could be check the box and we have the contact information, and then we get right now we're trying to look at, you know, because on whether or not there will be an application process that a restaurant would fill out, or if we're just going to ask, are you interested in taking advantage of this? And then staff would enter in the information. You know, that would be the question that we haven't really sorted at this point, because that was something that we discussed yesterday, kind of getting into the details of what that would look like. So it's something that Director Manfred and I are currently talking about. But we're looking at a very simple process, because we'll have a lot of that contact information, and if they check a box, you know, we'll be able to track that. But unlike some of the other grant programs to where we have an application, a vetting process, a review, and then we have to get grant agreements out to everyone, and then we have to cut checks for that, you know, more of our typical grant programs are a lot more staff intensive, and there's multiple steps, and there's both requirements on behalf of the person applying for the funds, processing, and then the follow-up for this. We're really trying to simplify it, because it's really, this grant's going to be tied to the license that they're getting for the year.
Thank you. So yeah, it's a tough one, because at the end of the day, it's yes, Yamhill County Board of Commissioners increased restaurant licensing fees. And then in the small print, it's, but you don't have to pay your license fee because it's being paid. So that story won't get told, obviously, but it needs to be told. And then next year, Ken?
I was just going to add, just to add on before I lost thought, is just like you were explaining, is probably how the motions should be reflected in there. I think these are two separate actions that if there's a motion, first would be the fees, and then the second motion would be the grant program.
Yeah, that's really a hard one to actually pull the trigger on, the let's raise license fees. I mean, that of course is a really hard thing to do without the understanding is that we're covering the whole thing this year. So it speaks to the fact that our employee costs, our personnel costs are going through the roof. They're far outpacing the private sector, and we have to deal with the reality of this. And I think this might be another thing that people in the private sector need to understand, is that we just keep you know, increasing the dollar amount for public employees, and the folks in the private sector have to pick up the slack. So yeah, I'm conflicted about this one. I really am. I think that if we weren't going to cover it, I would be saying, no, we'll figure it out somewhere else. But I also think that next year, when it comes, oh, we need 10%, that's going to be an even harder discussion. So you might want to brace yourself, Director Manfred, if you thought this was a hard stretch and we're going to be paying for it. Ken?
I just wanted to also just further that personnel costs, while it's a larger percentage of some of the operational costs that we as the county experience, but we also feel and experience the same increases that a lot of other places do when whether we're talking fuel, we're talking, you know, lights, utilities, material purchases, a lot of things that have also are part of an overall program that for any of our services or departments. So, but I do recognize that personnel costs are, you know, one of our largest drivers, as you can see with the budget. But, you know, I also just want to add that we also see the same increased costs when associated to materials and some of these other things that we also have to have and purchase in order to operate as well.
Well, at some point in time, we might have to have the discussion is if our personnel costs continue to rise and they continue to be a bigger and a bigger burden on the taxpayers, how do we look to address that, to ameliorate that? And if we're continuing to increase salaries and benefits and the costs associated, then at some point, perhaps we have to look at, to be fair to the taxpayers, maybe we don't have the number of employees that we currently have. That's just something that we might have to consider down the road, but that's just looking at the reality of this. So do we have any more discussion on this, and do we have a motion? Has everybody had their questions answered? Okay, Commissioner Berschauer?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank you for your question earlier, because that cleared up a lot of questions for me, and Ken's response as well. You know, I suppose it's incumbent upon us then to message to the public that this is what we're doing, and that it's a little bit more nuanced than it might appear. But at this point, as long as that process for the grants is much easier and accessible to our restaurant owners, then I am comfortable proceeding as we've discussed.
Okay, so do we have a motion?
So there would be, I want to make, I can do
First
a motion,
one.
but I want to make sure we get it. There's two, right? There's the one about the fees, and then there's the one about including mobile inspected units.
Well, I think that's part of what we've outlined in the grant, if you will, because they've also had a 3 a.m. epiphany about making sure caterers were included. So we're covering every single person who needs a license in this capacity.
Okay,
So it would just be the fees and the grant.
Okay, then I would move that we, I'll do the first one, which is that I move that we approve the new fee schedule as presented.
Thank you. We have a motion. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Reluctantly, the motion passes. Number two, the motion would be, and I'm going to go ahead and make this motion, that we cover the restaurant licensing fees, including the fee increase, in a application/grant scenario program at the time of license renewal. Would that be appropriate, Ken?
If I may, Chair,
Yes.
as a suggestion, I would like to recommend that maybe the motion be authorization to continue the restaurant licensing grant program for the 21-22 fiscal year, with the expanded eligibility to cover all licensing at the, you know, I'll just,
There's your motion.
I ran out of momentum there.
There's
So,
your motion. Okay, commissioners, further discussion? Hearing none. Thank you, Ken. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. And if that would be great if we could get an update on what it looks like in terms, so that we can message this out, and how can we message this out further to our restaurant licensees so that they know what's coming down the pike, and just give them some more information on this. That would be something we would do through Ken?
What we could do is we'll take the existing restaurant licensing program and we will update it with the eligibility expansion and the timeline, and then we can provide updates on what that's going to look like, because that'll include the outreach and portion of that program as well.
Okay, sounds good. Looks like we've accomplished that. Thank you. Director Manfred, I think that you are free to move around the county at this point. Is that right? Do we have anything else we need to torture Lindsay over? You've been great. Thank you for that. We've had this discussion for many weeks over the restaurant
you.
licensing
Yeah.
fees. Thank you. Is
Absolutely.
it okay if we take a 5-minute break at this point? Because we still have one more item. Will that work for everyone?
That
Okay.
works for me, Chair.
We'll go ahead and adjourn for 5 minutes. Okay, we're back and it is July 8th, 2021, and we are resuming our Yamhill County Board of Commissioners formal informal session at the point of item I, which is other business. And that would be I1, consideration of authorizing Yamhill County Department of Community Justice to submit a re-engagement opportunity grant application to the Youth Development Division for an education transition specialist to continue work with youth at risk in the juvenile probation department. Commissioner Bershauer?
Thank you, Chair. I would move approval of I1, and I just wanted to say that these transition specialists are absolutely critical for the juveniles who are either there or in probation. You know, they're pretty much the connection between keeping them on a trajectory upward in terms of their personal life and their schooling, and making sure that they can be successful that way. So it's absolutely critical. It looks like the current specialist has moved on to other things. So the earliest that we could have another one would be October-ish, which is not ideal because it's past when the school year starts. But I would move approval of this so that we could get this rolling as fast as possible.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a motion. Do we have further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. On to item I2, consideration of adopting a telework policy, and Mr. Huffer.
My apologies for the delay. I was making a note here. So in the packet, as we've had discussions quite a bit, there was a request that I circle back with the admin team and prepare a telework policy for you to take a look at and for consideration. This is intended to be, you know, we currently have a temporary policy that was implemented in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and to ensure that we could comply with OHA and OSHA guidelines and standards since March of last year. With that temporary policy coming to an end, you know, there is a recognition that there are some positions that may be suitable and eligible for continued telework. It's something that I think that we're going to see as a change. You know, this may be something as a change coming out of the last year and a half, that a change in how services are provided and our perspectives on offices. And so the means of this policy is not, you know, a mandate to telework or direction. What it essentially does is it outlines a criteria, eligibility criteria, and a process that at the department level can go to when they have a request for telework in order to process those requests and have agreements set in place to accommodate that when they determine it's operationally feasible to do so. And so, you know, we put together this draft policy and it's in the packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ken, for your work on this. Just a little retrospective as far as what the county had done prior to the requirements, where we pretty much had to send people home.
So prior to pre-pandemic, the use of telework or telecommute, you know, was really limited, and there were a few offices and departments that may have had, you know, some employees that were doing so either on a regular basis or more of a part-time basis, but that we did not have a policy in place. I think it's something that I think at the time, you know, there probably, in absence of a policy, there probably wasn't a lot of interest or a lot of in exploring those types of opportunities. The feedback that I'm getting from department heads, they do see some advantages, both as being competitive with recruiting opportunities, but then also seeing some cost benefit at times on being able to offer some of this. So I think this is something, telework is still relatively new. It might be more widespread in certain private sector industries. And, there's at times government lags in, on some of those trends, but I do think this is something that I'm getting feedback from departments that they have seen some value. They have seen that they have a number of successes that they can point to. Although we were kind of forced to a certain degree, because we really had to implement something in really short order. In fact, that temp policy, I think in 1 week we were drafting that and then bringing that before the board as an option in order to accommodate, hundreds of employees now in a teleworking situation. I think what we're seeing here, we're going to see a much smaller group, because there are a number of services. In fact, I would say a majority of the services that we currently provide at the county are not, it does require in-office, in-person interaction, and it's not fully able to be accommodated via telework. So I think a policy like this is really important to ensure consistency in how we're not only approving, department heads are processing and approving requests, but also on those times that we have to deny them or we have to revoke that approval. It just helps build clarity and consistency by having an adopted policy in place for departments to follow.
Thank you. Commissioners. Commissioner
Go ahead,
Kula.
Commissioner.
I would just say that it's really good seeing this. I appreciate all of your work and your team's work on it. And I don't see any red flags on it, but perhaps my colleagues may have concerns or things to clarify or bring up. But I appreciate it, and thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Berschauer.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Ken, for putting the time into this. This was very extensive. I think that my concerns in the past have been just to recognize that we are an employer and our customers are the public. So productivity for us is just as important as it is for any private business. And I know that they're undergoing those same discussions with their employees and mulling around the idea of teleworking policies as well. I did have a couple of questions, and I emailed you guys last night late, but my first question was around confidentiality, because we do have a lot of information that is confidential about members of the public. And so can you give me an example of maybe how that would be protected or addressed for some of these positions? And I don't know if that's Ken or Christian, but
I think it's going to fall to me. And I've got so many things open on my desktop. Sometimes I struggle tracking that down. We do have some specific language that's built into the policy around confidentiality and information that we have, because recognizing, because that's something from the start. And, if we brought Director Manfred back in, we could talk even more, because, the considerations, especially with HHS services and the concerns around HIPAA. But we do have language that's built in here about, as part of the eligibility requirement is reviewing, whether or not they can they have a confidential setting that they can interact, if they're teleworking as an example, and they're a clinician meeting with a client, they're not teleworking in a coffee shop and potentially everyone within earshot is hearing this, potentially HIPAA protected conversation. So again, that's where we tried to build in as many provisions as we can to ensure that if someone is requesting telework, that they have the ability to have a private setting, just like they would if they were sitting in an office in the county, that the doors are closed and information's being protected, and we have, that we remain compliant with whether it's HIPAA or CJIS or some of the other, specific confidentiality requirements that we're subject to. So we do have that language that's in here. That is something that it's a part of that operational consideration that the department head, when they're considering this request, is looking at, well, how is information going to be secured? What is the network set up to ensure that our network's not exposed, that we're not inadvertently releasing confidential information. So that is built in here, and I apologize that I'm not able to go right to the specific language in the policy.
But there is a number of different call outs for confidentiality and the more discretion and caution around it. I know that.
Okay.
And it's actually covered two different places in the policy. It's in the policy language itself, and then it's also in the telework agreement that the employees will be signing, acknowledging that they understand and will adhere to those security and confidentiality requirements.
Additional questions, Commissioner?
Yeah. The other one that I believe I sent was, there's a statement in here that says, where is it? It says workers' compensation will not apply to non-job related injuries that might occur in the home. I'm a little worried about this because I feel like when you're in an office setting, it's the whole setting, right? It's if something happens to you within that setting, you're covered, and it's a work related injury. In a home, it's a little bit different. If you're in your office, that's your work setting. If you get up and you go get a glass of water in your kitchen and you slip and fall, where's the line with that? I'm just a little bit worried about how that's going to practically apply for this type of work.
That's always a good question, especially with workers' comp, and also keeping in mind, because workers' compensation coverage is, it's there that you were injured in the line of duty, you were injured at work, and there's, that's always a struggle. That's why there's some additional language. It's really up to, one, there's language that's built in here around making sure it's a safe work environment. There's also potential for, if we have concerns that it's not a potentially safe work environment, or if we're starting to see trends, or claims being reported, that would be subject to all, just like any other accident investigation, whether it's in the workplace or another situation. I really look at this is workers' compensation and work, coverage and employee safety. It's always critical. And anytime that we get any type of claim that's brought forward, we have an obligation. Both, we will do an internal investigation and review on those injuries and what occurred. There's an obligation as an employer, as a supervisor, to look at what happened to make sure it doesn't happen again. And then the second part is also working closely with our workers' comp coverage with SAFE, that will also do a vetting and review of any claims that are submitted and voice in and bring those concerns to our attention as well. Ultimately, the approval and denial of claims is up to our provider, SAFE. They review the claims and then they make that determination. But we tried to build in as much language as we could into this policy to help, like I was saying, whether we're determining that employee A is working in office 101, 102, or a home office, a lot of this still applies the same way when we're making that determination, ensuring that they're working safely, that if there is an injury that's reported and claimed, that it would be subject to an investigation and review by HR and by our insurance carrier as well. And we would follow up and make changes and address safety issues like we would if they were here in the building. That if we have concerns that, well, you know, we're seeing a trend or something that's happening, then we can address that with policy and conversations on a case-by-case basis, or look at going back and doing some revisions to the policy as necessary and being able to adapt to that. Hopefully that answers your question. Workers' comp is always really, you know, in workplace safety and injury reporting and follow-up and investigations. That's something that we deal with, you know, on a constant basis. We're always on the lookout for. So, and we realize that this is going to potentially, it's a little more challenging because they're working in another location and not necessarily within a physical county building. So that does present some challenges that we'll have to manage and monitor for.
You could always send Jessica and the safety committee around to check the extension cords and how many plugs you have. Every time I see Jessica come in, I close the door, make sure I'm in compliance. Commissioner Kula, did you have any questions?
No, Chair, I did not. I feel like this policy has a lot of good details to it, and I feel comfortable with it.
I have a question about the about the demand prior to this.
Mm-hmm.
How much did we see, Ken, before we had a temporary policy?
See, that's one of the challenges that I have because, you know, I personally know of, you know, a couple where there was, you know, I can think of 3 off the top of my head, but because we didn't have a standing policy in place where, you know, I didn't necessarily have a stack of agreements that I could go and refer to, because it really was done much more informal. There wasn't a formal agreement and in place to kind of track and monitor how much utilization there was. So I don't have, other than my own personal experience of a few full-time employees that, you know, and in county counsel's office, sorry to Christian to put you on the spot, and you know, and we had another in our finance department that had done this, had a telework arrangement with their supervisor at the time for a number of years. So I can only speak to those that I have. I don't have any data that, because that wasn't something that was really widespread and we didn't have a policy in place. We didn't have agreements. Honestly, I look back, you know, on that. Now that we have this, you know, there's a lot of things in place that provides coverages that we didn't have at that time, you know, that really spells out what telework looks like and the expectations of the county, and having an assigned agreement in place. And, you know, I think there's a lot more exposure not having a policy and doing things more in a ad hoc or informal way. So.
Thank you. Well, thanks for the work on this. I know it was a lot. Commissioner Berschauer?
Sorry, Chair, I just had one follow-up question. And I did ask Ken and Christian this last night, but you know, I kind of view that privilege is not the right word, but I view teleworking as somewhat of a privilege because the financial impact is pretty significant. There's no commuting costs. There's, well, very few. There's, you know, potentially impact to childcare costs and all of those types of things. So the impact on some employees is different than others, and I'm sensitive to that. There's a part in here that talks about incidental costs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a little concerned about the language in it, just because it you know, earlier on in the document, it says you're responsible for your work setting. So you're responsible for setting up your work office, furniture, all of it. you need to print stuff out, you know, I'm assuming you got to buy your own printer. You have to have the internet, all of it. And there's a fine line, right? It's like, if you're doing work for the county, you know, how much of that are we going to accommodate? And part of this, the number 16 says that we may choose to reimburse for certain things like, you know, utility costs or cleaning services. And I just feel like that's a little bit too far from.
Yeah, and I saw your question around this, and the part that I would, you know, it does say in here about incidentals, you know, for the, you know, that unless otherwise stated in this agreement, I'm responsible for incidental costs, including residential phone, cell phone, internet, utility costs, cleaning services, and office supplies. When I really look at, and then the next section says the county may choose to reimburse some expenses without creating an ongoing duty or obligation to do so. That is to cover, because not every teleworking situation are people going to be using their own personal computers. You know, if I'm channeling Shane Hoffman, our IT manager at this point, there's concerns about and limitations for personal computer use, accessing the network. There's some areas of exposure with that. And in most cases over the last year and a half, employees are not, they've taken their work computers, their county computers home, and they're using those to do their work. So when we see, you know, we do have existing policies in place to reimburse in some cases expenses that the employee may have experienced while performing their work with the approval of the supervisor. We can't just say we're not going to cover everything, because if they have a county printer and they call their supervisor, I'm out of ink, I ran to Staples, I got this, you know, in order for me to, you know, replace the printer cartridge on the county-owned printer, you know, it would be right for us to, the county, to reimburse for that expense, as long as it's being communicated with the supervisor and they have protocols in place with doing that. That's what really this is going to cover. And then also, while it calls out, you know, around mileage in the policy, that we paid time or mileage involved between coming to the office and the telework location is not necessarily covered. But if someone is teleworking and then is going to a training in Salem, that may be eligible for mileage reimbursement. So we, you know, so there's some reimbursement. So that's why we have to have both, that we're, you know, it's not intended to pay for your home phone, your cleaning, or things like that, but there are county related or county eligible expenses that may be eligible for reimbursement.
Okay, so just, that makes sense. But so somebody comes forward and says, I really have a need to telework, but I don't have internet access at my home. You know, is that where the line is sort of going to be drawn, that, you know, we're not going to be paying for $100 Comcast bill every month because someone has a need to telework? I mean, I want to make sure I'm understanding where the line's going to be.
Well, again, that's part of the eligibility criteria, because as under the workspace, that if
Yeah, that's an expense that under this policy, the employees would be responsible for covering.
right.
Okay.
And if they don't have the ability to, you know, if it's a cabin in the woods and there's no internet at the place, you know, it's probably not a good place to you know, for, it won't, it's not conducive to telework. And so,
and I'm thinking of another situation in the if there was an employee who, as a disability accommodation, had to telework, then I suppose as part of that accommodation, we might cover the cost of the internet if it was part of that reasonable accommodation. But I would expect that would be a very infrequent occurrence.
correct.
Okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Anybody else? Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to approve and adopt the telework policy.
I would move that we approve and adopt the telework policy, and thank you for this important, flexible step.
Any further discussion? Ken, looks like you've got something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, what we were looking at for an effective date is, like I shared in the memo, that this wouldn't be effective. We need to, per the contract, because this is a new policy, we would have this, the effective date would be 14 calendar days from today. And then also recognizing that we do have a demand to bargain that we'll be meeting with AFSCME. And this policy will probably be part of that discussion as well. But in the meantime, I thought it was necessary to, at least because I had directed to bring this policy, and I had already shared a draft version of this policy with AFSCME leadership earlier this week. So, and so I just wanted to just add that little bit of information.
Thank you. So we have a motion. Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes, and thank you again, Ken and Christian, for working on this, and Commissioner Bershauer for your questions. So that leads us to public hearings. We have none. Commissioners, do we have announcements?
I just want to say it was great working with all of you at the meeting on whatever day that was. The House
Tuesday.
District. That's right. Thank you. I was honored to be a colleague of yours in that moment.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anybody else? No other announcements? Oh, I just want to add that, as you know, I've talked a little bit about the Oregon Firearm Safety Coalition, and this is a group of people we're trying to work on the suicide issues in the gun owners community. And we had a presentation that we gave to Yamhill Mayor Yvette Potter. And did you know, Ken Huffer, that she is a Marine? And she said to say to you, Semper Fi.
Hoorah.
Hoorah. And anyways, she's also very interested in giving this opportunity to her law enforcement officers, and we're working on that through Health and Human Services. As soon as we have a contract, we'll be talking about a little bit more about the program, and I'm very excited about it. And also Family Wellbeing Council, we have a peer navigator working with 17 families, and the object of the game is to get these families squared away so that none of their kids wind up going into foster care. So those are just some positive things that have been going on. So if there's nothing else for the good of the order, I want to thank everybody for your time and all the work that went into this session. Have a wonderful weekend, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.